25 years, so I've lived through G1 and G2 and so forth and so on. And I think Mario did a great job in terms of putting it in context why we need it. It's just the explosion of cell phones with all the applications on the smartphone. I was just reading today that that DC has 700,000 residents, but it's growing by 1,000 residents a month. So the infrastructure that we have is just being used, kind of like Field of Dreams. You build it, they will come. And so the network that we've built so far is really struggling right now. Like, I was just in a meeting, and the 4th of July events down in the mall, we're just determining how bad it's going to be, because our network is going to get decimated. It's not built to handle an influx of that many people on the National Mall. And the National Mall presents a unique set of circumstances all on its own, that it's not controlled by the District of Columbia, it's controlled by the National Park Service, and that's just a whole other issue in terms of getting infrastructure on the National Mall. But so really what we're here to talk about today is small cells in this area, in this ANC. And what I will say is that we signed an agreement with DC, I guess, or with DDOT and Octo on May 25th of 2018. We've yet to deploy any small cells in the right of way. DDOT has held a number of public meetings. They have a public space committee that actually adopted guidelines on what they should look like and how they'll be regulated. And so what we have here, this is a photo simulation of what the DC or DDOT guidelines currently permit in the public right of way. And so here's what we're talking about right now. This is a 5G, this is a Verizon Wireless 5G small cell installation. And it also includes an electric meter. I apologize, you can't really see it, but part of it is to be the reality, and we don't necessarily want to draw attention to it, but we're also not trying to hide it, although it does blend in with this car back here. But there's an electric meter and a disconnect, so that when they're servicing the light fixture, they can shut it off if they need to. But really, that's the impact of what's presently allowed. And then just to be transparent and show you what we're also working on is right now there's a stakeholder group made up of DDOT, Octo, Office of Planning, Office of Historic Preservation, NCPC, CFA. There's a large stakeholder group that's involved, and they're looking at a larger installation, which DC is divided into Class A and Class B. This represents the Class B, 5 cubic feet or less, and this is 5 cubic feet or less. This installation is a Class A installation, which the limit is 28 cubic feet. I know that I've heard a lot of information out there that, well, 28 cubic feet is the size of a refrigerator. And obviously we're not putting up a refrigerator. That's the limit, 28 cubic feet. And that's really defined by the FCC in terms of what is a small wireless facility. What we're actually proposing is something much smaller. And what this really is, this has the same 5G antennas, but it also has an additional antenna up here, which is actually our 4G antenna. Because, as Mario explained, we have 4G. It's been around for a little while, but it's going to be around for another 15 years probably. And eventually, 4G will go away and everything will be 5G. Your phones will all be 5G. And we'll probably be talking about 6G by that point too. But in the meantime, the 5G antenna is an integrated antenna and radio all together. So in order for your cell phone to work, the only wireless part of a cell phone is between this phone and this antenna. Once it hits that antenna, it goes via fiber optic cable to wherever it's going. And then if I was in California right now, and there was a light pole in California, you'd go from that antenna in California to the guy standing on the street with his phone in California, and that would be his only wireless part. So between the cell phone and the closest antenna point is the wireless part. Everything else has to go via fiber. So the 5G antenna, one of the new innovations, is an integrated antenna. So we can get away with a much smaller footprint or impact. The 4G antenna includes equipment located in the base of the light pole. And currently, this is this is sort of what we're talking about right now with the stakeholder group that's doing the design work. This has not been approved, but it'll be some form or fashion of that. It might be narrower and a little bit taller. There's various things being looked at right now, but it'll be something with equipment in the base, an antenna on the top, and of course the 5G antenna.
You know, I don't mean to be rude. I just want to make sure, see if anybody had any questions, because we got to kind of move along with the agenda.
That'd be perfect, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Does anybody on the commission have a question?
So I had a specific, well, this is just because a constituent wanted me to tell you this. So she was overly concerned about if there's going to be some sort of hazards coming from the devices, you know, like radio waves, that type of stuff.
That'd be a shift.
So I can speak to that real quick, in that the FCC is a regulatory body for wireless communications. And it doesn't matter what wireless communications or what communications. Like if you have anything at home, anything electrical has an FCC, you know, stamp on it. Cell phones are no different. They're highly regulated. We're much like radio stations, you know. You can't have one radio station interfering with another radio station. And Verizon and AT&T and Sprint and T-Mobile are all the same, that we have to operate within our band. So that's the first thing. We have certain frequencies that we're licensed to operate within. We have to stay there. The second thing that they regulate is how much power we're allowed to put out. So, you know, an AM radio station puts out a lot of power. That's why when you're listening to, you know, you're driving around listening to an AM station, all of a sudden you hear somebody in Chicago, and it's bouncing off the atmosphere, and you're picking up here in DC. Wireless communications are very restricted, but they're also limited in power just in order to operate, because, you know, as you're driving down the road, your signal is actually being handed off between one cell site and another. And if those cell sites are too close, or too much power is being transmitted, and they're hearing each other, then the phone gets confused about which one it should be listening to. So long story short, they're very, very low power, very low power. In terms of 5G, there's a lot of information out there. If you Google, you'll hear it's bad for you. You'll hear it's not bad for you. I mean, we have to go with what the FCC says. The FCC relies on other regulatory agencies, the FDA. You can actually go and search on the FCC's website of all the regulatory bodies, and Mario has some information that we can hand out about that. But you know, it's been studied quite a bit, and there hasn't been anything conclusive that says that that it's hazardous to your health. The FCC regulations have set it at a substantial safety margin in terms of a lower power level than would be possibly deemed health, that could cause health issues. So they've lowered the bar, and that's where we have to operate, and usually we operate at a much lower frequency or a much lower power level than that, just to make the phones work anyhow, because we don't want to have too much power, especially in a densely populated area like DC,
Okay.
where we have a lot of cell phones and lots of cell phone towers.
Perfect.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
thank you so much. I appreciate you coming.
Can I just ask you a quick question?
Well, we really got to get going. But I'll tell you what. Would you mind if she comes over and talks to you?
Sure.
Perfect.
We can hang out.
Next up,
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much, guys. Next up, we got the Mount Vernon Triangle Community Improvement District, given their requesting support for a grant for Prather's Alley. So we got two requests for support for this particular grant. The first is going to be by the Mount Vernon Triangle Community Improvement District, and the next will be for a similar request at the 800 New Jersey Ave. I'm going to ask both groups to kind of keep the presentation as tight as possible. Take some time for a couple questions, and then we'll move on.
All right.
Ebony.
Thank
Let's
you
hear
very
it.
much. Yes, thank you to the commissioners for having us here on the agenda. Thank you all so much for staying and checking out this presentation. My name is Ebony Dumas. I'm the Associate Director of Planning and Economic Development for the Mount Vernon Triangle Community Improvement District. And the organization has worked for over 3 years to improve safety for pedestrians, for non-motorized vehicles, such as bicycles, scooters, dockless, and otherwise, in Prather's Alley. And so today we are here, as Commissioner Myriad just said, to request a letter of support from the ANC 6E to continue this work with a DC Commission on Arts and Humanities fiscal year 20 Public Art Building Communities grant. So with this grant, MVT-CID will serve as the project sponsor, as the cultural activation and traffic calming elements have both been demanded by and are important to our stakeholders. And because we're also an organization with standing as it relates to the area that will be impacted by these interventions. And so with that, I'll pass it on to our partners to talk a little bit more about the design.
Thank
Good
you.
evening, everyone. My name is Adriana with Urban Sea. This is Meredith and Mark with El Studio. So we'll just very quickly run through some of the process and kind of the community engagement that we've tried to do, and then jump into some of the proposals. We don't have enough of these handouts for everyone, but if you can probably huddle together and take a look, I'll also hold this one. Prather's Alley, as you can see, is located between K and I Street. What is it, four and a half. So it's highlighted here in the magenta. If we turn our page here, we've really tried to engage in a strong participatory process, really trying to base any type of engagement to reactivate the alley and kind of reappropriate the alley for its more pedestrian use and for community use by really engaging you guys. So hopefully you have received some of the surveys, you have seen some of the, or you did participate in some of the charrettes that we've had. But ultimately what we try to do was kind of summarize this in a 5-step process. The first one really taking an analysis and understanding a little bit more of the alley, engaging both the ANC and other organizations in the neighborhood before we actually even started thinking about proposing anything. We started with a survey that was done in, I believe, November of last year, 2018. Just a very quick show of hands if any of you guys actually answered that survey. Okay, perfect, so you are familiar with it. And that was pretty much to just get a gauge of what the perception was about the alley, what people wanted to see, what people didn't want to see. So some of the needs and wants within that. We, from that survey, jumped into more of gathering some of the initial ideas and jumped into a community charrette from that. From those ideas then came up with these proposals, but I'll just very quickly walk you through it. The first, right, if we switched kind of this 11 by 17 here. So this page here is really kind of showing a very quick kind of use study that we did as a first step even before engaging in the survey, just to understand what some of the traffic flow was, both for vehicular traffic, trucks, pedestrian, bikes, just to understand what we were looking at the different times of day. And from there, jumped into kind of getting that survey to get a better notion of the needs and wants. Based on your feedback, then organize the community charrette in January of this year. And these are actually some images of that charrette. So we built kind of ideal models. Again, show of hands, anyone here participate in that charrette? Okay, not necessarily, but it was a fun, well, yes. So it was a fun exercise, built some models with an idea of what the ideal alley could be, got some proposals from there, and those are actually what, this very quickly, those are actually what inspired kind of these initial, let's say, concept designs that have been sitting in Prather's Alley for the last couple of weeks that you all voted on. Show of hands, who voted? Okay, pretty good number, good. And so what we are going to do now is hopefully present basically the winning proposal for this. I do want to mention that in between all of these processes, we have been in extensive conversations with DDOT, with Office of Planning. So all of these let's say, proposals do keep in mind a lot of traffic calming, a lot of pedestrian safety that we do want to encourage, lighting, et cetera. So you'll see some similarities in all, they just kind of render, let's say, a different perspective in terms of the placemaking strategy, in terms of the activation of art, et cetera. What you will find very quickly, before I turn it over to Mark to talk about the, kind of the winning proposal, is on page 7 and 8, which are kind of these bar diagrams. These are kind of the summarized, let's say, preferences that came out of the community charrette. So really stating, you know, what type of activities, what type of interventions people would like to see, and then what some of the priorities were. So really looking at art as one of the main priorities, really looking at safety, pedestrian safety in particular as one of the priorities, traffic calming, and then some of the programming that comes around, which is basically reflected in all of the 3 proposals that were made. So with that, let me hand it over to Mark.
Sure. So we'll talk about the winning scheme and keep it short. If you have questions about any of the other schemes, feel free to talk with us afterwards. Important elements to keep in mind for this particular alley is, one is safety. There's pedestrian traffic, there's vehicular traffic. So we're trying to find a way for people to occupy the alley in a recreational way, or as they're walking, making a shortcut maybe to and from work. People use the alleys all the time, but we're trying to find other functions to make a place in the alley. And so the marketplace scheme, I think, was selected a lot, was a favorite because it picks up on an existing function on Saturdays, which is the farmers market. And so this, with that happening on the weekend, we thought it would be nice to have potentially a place to sit. So if you got something to eat, you could actually be slightly nearby and go and have a sandwich or eat some fruit or whatever. So there's sort of a place in the alley that builds on an existing function. The safety components have to do with lighting and traffic calming. So we want to find a way to define a place where people kind of have a tendency to walk. We want to put in some traffic calming in addition to what's already there at the intersection, so that when cars or trucks are going around these corners, they're going a bit slower so people can feel safer and occupy the alley as well. And then lighting is a component that is both kind of an art and a safety element, so it does both for us. And so we're looking at some LED lighting in the alley to kind of highlight the space where people could occupy, but also, make it feel a little bit more appealing if someone was walking home late at night. So the marketplace scheme is the one that, they were all very popular, but that one came through as the clear winner, and so that one's the one that we're going to use to continue with the grant application.
And just to clarify location, this is the VA building, so what you see in the rendering here, and it's right behind that. So it'd be extending kind of the market coming from this pier, going around on 4th and a half, and then basically at the backside of the VA building, which currently it's actually DDOT, right? The entire alleyway is DDOT property. There's a lot of de facto parking that happens there, but they're not officially parking spaces. So it is a space that currently is, let's say, mostly occupied by cars.
Right.
Is there, I was just looking at the numbers, because I know that pet recreation is a huge thing in the neighborhood. And while it looks like it took 3rd, it did get most of like the number 1 votes. And I'm just thinking, is there any way that the concepts could be combined to incorporate, maybe, a marketplace and a pet recreation?
Possibly. We, it starts to get a little, we actually are applying for a couple grants, and so it could be that it comes through in another grant as part of, and we might be back here again and talking about the pet recreation.
Okay.
So yeah, it was something we're thinking about, but we kind of have to at least take some of these elements and move them forward, and
Sure.
And as the community gives us more feedback, we can certainly add more.
And I would add to that, just some best case uses that we've talked to from people around the country. Starting off slow is much better than trying to do everything all at the same time. And so maybe the seating for 7-Eleven, you can't not have that and then add it on a year and a half later if they're a good actor. But with these type of activations, it is better to kind of start off slow and instead of just going all out with that.
Any other questions from the commission?
So I was at that meeting, and I like the overall thought of the project, and I get that, because I'm pro culture and art and et cetera. But my concern is the safety. I use that alley 4 times a week, at least when I go to Orange Theory. So you have, is there 3 or 4 garage entrances back in that alley? How many garage entrances?
There's probably more.
Probably more because you got.
Or is there
like-
5?
So the last,
Yeah.
the
So I-
last page has,
There's a lot.
has all the notations there.
Okay, so
There's
like
all the
when I'm
pages.
there, whenever I go to Orange Theory, there's always cars back there.
Yeah.
So I think safety, I have a problem wrapping my head around how safe this is gonna be because of those garage entrances. And I know the hotel is not coming, Alex, but how long is this project gonna last? Is it permanent? I can't remember.
So it's
temporary?
it's a 1 to 2 year project. I mean, it's still temporary, but it's, you know, the intent is to have it more than a season.
Because it probably would have that, you know, I think I mentioned at that meeting, if that lot is actually taken by whatever entity, whatever building's coming, they would use that alley for a staging area.
You're talking about the buildings,
Don't
the
you
new
think?
buildings that
No.
are going
Why
over
not?
here.
Well, whatever. I'm just saying that probably won't happen in your time frame, but
Well, just let me speak to a
Yeah.
few items. If you look at page 13, and you're right, I mean, there are a lot of garages back there. Page 13 is one of the pages we've been working with DDOT, which highlights all of the entries, but also talks about the width of the alley, which is actually at that point, it's like 47 feet wide. There is enough space to occupy a 15-foot zone and still provide space for the trucks to kind of do their thing. So I think with the combination of traffic calming and kind of designated safe zones so that people tend to maybe walk on one side of the alley as opposed to everywhere, those are some of the things that we're trying to do so that it makes it for a safer conditions. It also might build awareness that as we, you know, build some activities in that space, it starts to raise a different kind of sense of how we use our alleys in the city.
All right, any other,
Two
Commissioner
questions
Butler?
for you. How are you gonna select the vendors that are going to be occupying the market space stalls? And are those gonna be free to the vendors, or are you gonna charge the vendors?
So we definitely haven't gotten to that point yet. We just literally 3 days ago closed the voting for this, and so we needed a couple days to review the numbers. But that is a good question and something that we plan to address within the next month. The application is due on August 9th. And so currently we work with Fresh Farm Market for the Saturday marketplace. And that is an option to expand with them and have them do the programming over there as opposed to us, curating and taking on an extra operation activity. But we're happy to stay in touch with you about that. We just knew that you all weren't meeting in August, and so we wanted to get here sooner than later when we had everything kind of fleshed out. But if you have ideas about that, we're happy to hear that. I have my card with me, and so I'll pass you my card. Anyone else has any ideas about that, we're happy to hear that.
And again, just to reiterate, I mean, this is also, it's grant dependent, right? So
Yeah.
part of what we're doing is applying to various grants to be able to fund something like this, which will be kind of a pilot for the city and hopefully, kind of changes a little bit of the precedent and paradigm that we see and we start seeing a little bit more of these throughout. But it is grant dependent, so at the moment, ultimately what we're asking for is your support for us to be able to apply for this and hopefully get some funding.
So two other observations, number one, Blagden Alley has been a great success. I mean,
Yeah.
You go on there any weekend, you've got throngs of people going through there, and there are no vendors in there, all you have is the artwork to enjoy and the business in the road. So I think that actually having some more activity in there will be very beneficial overall, to the neighborhood. I don't see a budget, so what is proposed, what's the ask for the city commission?
Sure, so we wanted to get to that with the next steps, and the budget has not been finalized yet. Again, this is something that we had no idea, pet recreation, that kind of a budget is really different than marketplace type of budget. But we are still working to secure a match, because with this particular grant, there has to be a 50% match. And so if we're requesting $50K from the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities, then we have to bring $50K to the table as well. And so we're still working on that to finalize the budget. But the funding will not go to the CID as any kind of management fee. And so this is what we see as part of our operations and our job to provide public space activations and to curate the public space for the stakeholders here in the area.
And for my colleagues, just so you understand, the application process, the letter is required in order for the application to be able to be submitted.
Okay. All right, well, we'll get that in just a minute. I do want to take a vote so we can keep moving. Would anybody like to make a motion that ANC 6E support the MBT SID application for this grant?
To the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities for the Public Arts Building Communities Program.
FY20.
For FY20. I'll make that motion.
I second.
Seconded by Commissioner Nigro. All in favor?
Aye.
It is unanimous. First vote of the night. How about that, guys? Thank you so much. All right, we got our next group coming up for the same grant.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to step away because
Sure.
My employer is a partner in this application. So
Understood.
if someone can let me know when you've concluded, so I can rejoin the meeting.
I will see you tomorrow.
I'll introduce myself while Alex is leaving. I'm Drew Porterfield. I'm the director at Longview Gallery in Washington, D.C. I'm here speaking on behalf of Longview Gallery and Shaw Main Street and Toby from Dante's Partners. Longview Gallery was approached from Dante's Partners about helping select and manage and provide a public art piece at their new development at Capitol Vista. The art will live at the corner of New Jersey Avenue and 2nd Street. There's a lot of information in the packet about who Longview is and who Shaw Main Street is and who Dante's Partners is. If you have any questions or would like to know any more about that, please feel free to read through those things, and we're available to answer those questions towards the end. So, much like you just heard, we are here to ask for the support of the ANC in this public art grant through the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. So seeking a letter of support from the ANC. Also, this public art piece for Dante's Partners is a part of their PUD from the Zoning Commission. So for them to get the density necessary to provide as much affordable housing as possible in this development, they committed to providing funding for a public art piece for the surrounding community. So if you flip through the proposed site, as I mentioned, is you see the drawing is at the corner of New Jersey and 2nd Street. There's a little gray picture where you can see their building in the background. The location for the sculpture that will end up on the site that looks like a red squiggly, but it will not be a red squiggly. This was just a stand-in for the initial drawings. Went through an iterative process with Dante's Partners through a wide range of local artists that we could talk about who we thought were the right people to activate this space for the community. We have had success in the past as Longview Gallery working on these projects with both Shaw Main Streets and Dante's Partners, most recently at City Market at O Street. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the large sculpture on the side of the Hodge, the Symphony and DC Major. So that is actually a Dante's Partners development. It is an artist that Longview Gallery helped facilitate and find for that space, and we worked with Shaw Main Streets in receiving that grant. So we sort of put the same team back together. Fortunately for us, everyone also fell in love with Zachary Oxman again, who is a local artist who has now created sort of a sculpture gallery across the city. So if you just click through, the Duke Ellington Plaza piece in front of the Howard Theater is maybe the most familiar sculpture of his in the city, second only to Symphony and DC Major, as I was just mentioning, which is at the corner of 9th and 7th. So that would be another awesome public art piece for you to take a look at. And that Symphony and DC Major was part of this grant program that we did in 2016, I believe. So for this project, I'm just going to read this quick little paragraph about what inspired Zach for the artwork. So, in concert with Dante's Partners' goal of providing quality, affordable housing for everyone in the nation's capital, artist Zachary Oxman set out to capture the spirit of inclusivity. The sculpture presents a circle with no beginning and no end, the truest emblem of inclusivity. Perched atop the ring is a mirrored and abstracted bird. Here, Oxman references nature's greatest migrants in celebration of DC's truly global community. This mirrored bird allows all viewers to see themselves as part of the story of the sculpture, both figuratively and literally. You get to see yourself reflected back in it. So there are some sketches of what the intention of the sculpture to look like will be. You can flip through those, they're super cool. to get an idea of the mirroring, if you haven't seen that Symphony in DC major piece, Zach worked with a highly polished stainless steel, so it is physically a mirrored surface, but it also has a round shape to it. So stainless steel sculpture anchoring the corner of this development, the mirrored bird, as I was just saying, so that the viewers can, understand the migrant portion of the story we're trying to tell, but also see themselves as part of the story. He uses automotive paint to make sure it lasts as long as possible. There's maintenance plans already in place within the developer and the artist. It will also be lit at night, so it's something that can be experienced 24 hours a day. So our grant proposal, Dante's Partners, as was just mentioned, these grants are a one-to-one match from the city. So in the case of our project, the developer has graciously decided to spend $75,000 to make this public art piece happen on their property. So the city will then also, as long as we are awarded the grant, would match that $75,000 investment from the developer for $150,000 overall budget for the sculpture. And then as we did with Symphony and DC Major, we will plan many public interactions. This list that's in here is just some of the things that we've talked about so far. There will definitely be a public ribbon cutting that everyone is welcome to. Zachary Oxman, again, is a local artist, so he will be there before and after and during the installation for all sorts of artist talks and studio visits and cool stuff like that. We love doing a Kids Day. We did it at Symphony and DC Major, so the local students can come in, meet the artists, see the work, learn more about that process. And then we are now that Zach has work sort of starting to spread out across the city, we've been talking about getting together a sculpture tour for him, so that there's a way we can have something, at least in writing, that you could check out online and have a chance to hear about everything where it exists around the city while you're looking at it. Those are just sort of a few of our initial thoughts about the public interactions.
Great.
And that's that.
Do you have any, Commissioner Nigro?
So I talked to Drew separately before our meeting started. So I posed to Alex Padro and the rest of the commissioners last night by email. It didn't seem to make sense where this project is going to be and how Shaw Main Street was involved, because Shaw Main Street is quite north, versus why isn't the Mount Vernon Cid involved, So that then, Drew, if you'd like to explain.
Yeah, so the Longview Gallery exists in Alex's
Yeah.
S&D. So I've worked with and known Alex Padro for years via the gallery, and then working on Symphony and DC Major before, the grant process has, I know how successful Shaw Main Street has been and has been for us and even for other people